The cold wind swept through the quiet streets of Chicago as Daniel pulled his coat tighter around him. The towering buildings loomed above, their glass windows reflecting the dim glow of streetlights. Snowflakes drifted down, melting as they touched the wet pavement. He walked along the cracked sidewalk, past closed storefronts and flickering neon signs, his breath visible in the freezing night air. Had lived in this city for years, but it had never felt lonelier than it did now. His hands were buried deep in his pockets, his footsteps echoing off the alley walls. Another night, another pointless walk to nowhere. The weight of the past pressed against his chest, making it harder to breathe. What am I even doing? He used to have a purpose, a job he loved, a wife who made him laugh, a little girl who would run into his arms at the end of the day. But now, it was just him, and the silence. A sudden noise pulled him from his thoughts, a faint whimper. He stopped in his tracks, his heart quickening. He turned his head, scanning the dark alley beside him. There, beneath a rusted dumpster, something shifted. Daniel squinted, stepping closer. A dog, small, thin, and trembling. Its fur was matted, with dirt, its ribs visible beneath its fragile frame. Snow clung to its paws, and its dark eyes were wide with fear. Daniel crouched slowly, careful not to startle the animal. How long has it been out here? How many? People walked past and did nothing. His throat tightened as he extended his hand slightly. "Hey, buddy," he whispered, his voice barely louder than the wind. The dog flinched but didn't run. It simply stared at him, exhausted, defeated. A pang of sorrow twisted in Daniel's chest. He knew that look. He had seen it in the mirror too many times. A soul too tired to keep fighting. He swallowed hard, pushing down the lump in his throat. "It's okay," he said gently. "I won't hurt you." He slowly unzipped his coat, hesitating for only a second before shrugging it off. The cold hit him instantly, but he ignored it. Carefully, he laid the coat down in front of the dog, offering warmth, offering trust. For a moment, neither of them moved. Then, after what felt like forever, the dog shifted just an inch toward the coat. It sniffed the fabric, hesitating, before finally curling into it, its small body sinking into the warmth. Daniel let out a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding. Kneeling in the snow, watching this fragile creature cling to the little comfort he had to offer, something inside him cracked open. He had come out tonight thinking he had nothing left to give. But maybe, just maybe, he had been wrong. And in that moment, Daniel knew this night would change everything. As Daniel sat there, watching the dog slowly settle into the coat, he felt a warmth spread through him he hadn't felt in a long time. The dog wasn't just seeking shelter. It was seeking something deeper, something more. Trust, maybe, or hope. And for the first time in ages, Daniel felt like he had something to give again. He carefully stroked the dog's matted fur, feeling the tremors under his breaded fingertips. This poor thing, it's been through so much, he thought. Just like me. The thought made him pause. Was he really that different from this dog? They were both lost, both carrying invisible wounds that no one could see. And yet, here they were together, two souls, surviving on scraps of kindness and the faintest thread of hope. The dog shifted in his lap, curling closer. Daniel smiled softly, wiping the wetness from his eyes, though he wasn't sure if it was from the cold or something deeper. Maybe we're not so alone after all, he sighed, his breath forming a cloud in the cold night air. I don't know how we got here, but I won't leave you, Daniel murmured. The dog's ears twitched as if understanding, and he nudged Daniel's hand with his nose. Daniel laughed, the sound raw but real. It's like we're both figuring it out at the same time, he thought. I guess we've got each other now. He sat there for a while longer, just holding the dog, letting the silence wrap around them like a comforting blanket. It felt like a small miracle, something simple, yet extraordinary, as though the world had paused for just a moment to let them heal, together. But as the night grew colder, Daniel knew it was time to move. He gently lifted the dog into his arms, cradling him close. "Come on, buddy," he said softly. "Let's get you warm." With careful steps, he carried the dog through the quiet streets, heading for his apartmenta place. He hadn't felt like home in a long time, but maybe, just maybe, it could be now. When they reached the building, Daniel opened the door slowly. The dog whimpered softly in his arms, and Daniel reassured him with a gentle hum as he walked up the stairs. As he pushed open his apartment door, the warmth inside hit him immediately. The dog's nose twitched, sniffing the air as they stepped inside. Daniel set him down on the old, worn-out rug by the couch, watching as the dog lay down, curling up into a ball. For the first time in ages, Daniel felt at peace. He didn't feel so lost anymore. As he sat on the couch, staring at the quiet, peaceful animal in front of him, Daniel realized that this wasn't just about saving a dog. It was about saving himself. The simple act of giving, of showing kindness, had begun to mend the broken pieces inside him. "You saved me too, you know," Daniel whispered, his voice barely above a murmur. The dog's ears perked up at the sound of his voice, but he didn't move. And in that moment, Daniel knew that they both had a long road ahead of them, but they would walk it together. The next morning, when the sunlight streamed through the window, Daniel awoke to the soft sound of paws padding across the floor. The dog was up, watching him with those same dark, trusting eyes. Daniel smiled, his heart lighter than it had been in years. This was the beginning of something new, something healing. He got up slowly, stretching as the dog wagged his tail slightly. He wasn't alone anymore. Neither of them was. And just like that, the world didn't seem so dark anymore. One afternoon, just as the light started to fade, there was a knock at the door. Daniel's heart skipped a beat. Who could it be? He wasn't expecting anyone. When he opened the door, he froze. Standing there, with a worried look in his eyes, was a man. "I'm sorry to bother you," the man said, his voice soft, filled with concern. "I'm looking for my dog. His name's Max. He ran off a few days ago. Have you seen him?" Daniel felt his breath catch in his throat. Max, the dog he had come to love so much, the one who had healed him without even knowing it. But the man looked desperate, his eyes pleading. Max, hearing his name, walked slowly toward the door, his tail twitching uncertainly. He paused, glancing at Daniel, then back at the man. For a moment, there was silence. Daniel's heart ached as he watched the dog, unsure of what to do, torn between what he knew was right and the bond they had shared. Max stepped forward, taking a few hesitant steps toward the man. The man dropped to his knees, tears filling his eyes as he reached out to Max. "Max, is it really you? I thought I lost you forever." Max let out a low whimper, inching closer. His tail wagged cautiously, and he licked the man's face as if remembering something deep inside. Daniel stood frozen, watching the reunion unfold. His heart was heavy, the weight of the moment pressing down on him. This is where he belongs, he thought. This man loves him. Max needs to be with him. But as the man hugged Max, holding him tight, Daniel couldn't shake the feeling that this moment wasn't the end for him and Max. There was something in the way the dog looked at him, something unspoken, like he didn't want to leave. He wanted to stay with both of them, his two worlds colliding. The man glanced up at Daniel, his voice thick with gratitude. "Thank you for taking care of him. I don't know how to repay you." Daniel's chest tightened, but he smiled, forcing the words out. "He's more than just a dog. He's a part of both of us now." The man nodded, his gaze softening. "I know. I can see it in his eyes. But I think he needs you too. I can't take him away." For a moment, Daniel thought his heart would break. But then Max turned his head, looking back at Daniel. There was something in that look, a quiet understanding, as if the dog was saying goodbye too. Nothing more than a moment of confusion. He gave a soft whine, and then slowly walked back to Daniel, settling by his feet. The man stood up, smiling sadly. "I can't make you take him, but I know he'll always remember this." Daniel reached down, gently petting Max's head. "I'll always remember too," he whispered. The man gave him one last look, and with a quiet nod, he turned and looked away. But Daniel didn't feel the emptiness that had threatened to swallow him. Instead, he felt a quiet peace, knowing that no matter what, Max was where he needed to be, with him. Days turned into weeks, and Daniel and Max found new rhythms in their lives. Every morning, Max would nudge him awake with a gentle bark, wagging his tail in the quiet of their small apartment. Daniel smiled, his heart lighter than it had been in years. The weight of the world felt a little less heavy when Max was around. They took long walks through the park, where Max ran ahead, his energy contagious. And at night, they curled up on the couch, the dog's head resting on Daniel's lap as he watched old movies. The flickering light of the television reflecting on both of them. They didn't need words anymore. In the silence between them, they had found something that couldn't be broken. Daniel had given Max a second chance, and in return, Max had shown him the power of companionship, of healing, of love that didn't need to be perfect to be enough. And when things got hard, when life threw obstacles their way, Daniel and Max didn't give up on each other. When the bills piled up, Max would curl up next to him, reminding him that it was okay to keep going. When Daniel had his bad days, when the loneliness crept in, Max would be there loyal, steadfast, and gentle. Together, they faced every challenge, and together, they learned that sometimes the people or animals that we rescue end up saving us in ways we never imagined. Max had not only found a home with Daniel, but he had also found a family, a friend, a lifeline. And Daniel knew, with a certainty that filled him with warmth, that no matter what came next, they would face it side by side, stronger and more connected than ever. Life with Max felt perfect, but sometimes, life has a way of testing even the strongest bonds. One evening, as Daniel and Max walked through their favorite park, something strange happened. The wind picked up, howling through the trees, and the sky darkened quickly, signaling an approaching storm. Max, who had always been brave and energetic, suddenly froze, his ears standing tall as he stared into the distance. Daniel felt a chill creep up his spine. "Max, what's wrong, buddy?" Daniel asked, his voice thick with worry. But before he could react, Max bolted. Without a moment's hesitation, he dashed off into the trees, disappearing into the thickening shadows. Daniel shouted after him, but Max was gone. Panic surged through him, and his heart pounded in his chest. "Max, come back," Daniel called, his voice trembling with fear. He ran after him, his breath coming in quick gasps. The storm was coming faster now, and the rain began to pour down in heavy sheets, soaking Daniel to the bone. He had never felt so helpless in his life. The park, once familiar and safe, had turned into a maze of darkness and rain. Minutes stretched into what felt like hours, and still, there was no sign of Max. Daniel's mind raced. Had something happened to him? Was he hurt? Was he lost? The thought of losing Max was unbearable, a pain that tore at his heart with every step he took. Daniel pushed through the rain, shouting Max's name until his throat was raw, but there was no answer. His feet slipped on the wet ground, and exhaustion began to set in, but he couldn't stop. He couldn't give up. He needed Max. Just when Daniel thought he couldn't go any further, he heard a faint sound in the distance, a whimper, followed by the unmistakable rustle of leaves. His heart leapt in his chest. "Max!" Daniel pushed himself forward, every ounce of energy focused on reaching the sound. As he turned a corner, he spotted Max, his fur matted with rain and dirt, his body trembling with fear. He was trapped in a bramble bush, his leg caught in the thorny vines. "Max!" Daniel cried, rushing to him. His hands shook as he gently pulled the vines away, carefully freeing Max's leg. The dog whimpered, his body still shaking, but his eyes, those trusting, soulful eyes, locked onto Daniel's with pure love and relief. Daniel scooped him up, cradling him close, his heart racing. "It's okay, buddy. I've got you. You're safe now," Daniel whispered, his voice soft but filled with emotion. The storm was still raging around them, but in that moment, all that mattered was Max, in his arms, safe and sound. But as Daniel started to turn back toward the path, he stumbled, nearly falling. He was exhausted, his legs felt like lead, and his breath was ragged. Max, sensing his distress, nuzzled him gently, as if reassuring him that they would make it through this together. But Daniel's legs were starting to give out. His body was telling him he couldn't keep going much longer. The storm seemed to intensify, and with it, the cold that seeped deep into his bones. He needed shelter, and fast. As he looked around, his eyes landed on a small abandoned shed, just a few feet away. It wasn't much, but it would offer shelter from the storm. Daniel moved toward the shed, his body shaking with fatigue. But before he could make it there, his vision blurred. He stumbled, barely keeping his balance, and then everything went black. When Daniel woke up, he was lying on the cold, hard floor of the shed. Max was curled up next to him, his warm body pressing against his side. The storm had passed, But the world outside was still soaked in rain, and Daniel could feel the weight of exhaustion pressing down on him. Max lifted his head, his eyes bright and filled with concern. It was as though the dog had never left his side, even when Daniel had lost consciousness. Max's presence was a reminder that they were in the together no matter the storm, no matter the danger. Daniel's heart swelled with gratitude, his fingers gently stroking Max's fur. "You saved me, Max," Daniel whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "You're the reason I'm still here. I don't know what I would have done without you." Max's tail wagged slightly, as if understanding. As he nuzzled Daniel's hand, Daniel smiled. A tear slipped down his cheek, but it was a tear of relief. He had been through so much, but in that moment, he knew that Max wasn't just a dog. He was his savior, his family, his reason to keep going. As they stayed there together, the world outside quieted, the rain finally stopping, and Daniel knew that their bond had been tested and it had survived. The storm was over, but their journey together was far from finished. Every challenge, every test, had only strengthened the love between them. And now, Daniel understood something he hadn't before. Love wasn't just about being there for each other. In the calm, good times, it was about surviving the storms together, no matter how hard they raged. Max had saved him, and Daniel knew in his heart that he would never let go. They would face whatever came next side by side, a team that had been forged in the fire of their shared struggle. Nothing could break their bond now. Nothing. As the days passed, Daniel and Max continued their quiet journey together. The storm had been a test, but they had emerged stronger, bound by a bond neither time nor circumstance could break. Daniel no longer felt the weight of loneliness that had once pressed him down. Max had taught him the true meaning of companionship, the simple, unspoken understanding that no matter the challenges, love could carry them through. Max, too, had changed. No longer the frightened stray he once was. He was now a dog who trusted deeply, who knew what it felt like to be truly loved. Together, they had become a family, proving that sometimes the ones we save end up saving us. Daniel thought of the days ahead, of the walks, the quiet nights, and the adventures that awaited them. As he looked down at Max, his heart swelled with a deep, unshakable peace. They had found each other, and that, he knew, was enough. Adopt, rescue, love. These small acts could change lives just like they had changed theirs.